Hello and welcome to 5 for the Future for the week of November 6th. Thanks for joining me for this video summary of my weekly paid newsletter that shares 5 top signals of change that you need to know about in order to future-proof your small business. The paid newsletter has more details on each topic and a lot more on my take as to why these topics stood out to me. But this amazing video summarizes the key points for you, and I have to say, I think the videos do a decent job, but you don't know what you're missing out on if you don't get the actual newsletter. So think about subscribing. Anyway, I'm still glad you're here with me today. So are you ready to get started with our 5 topics for this week? Let's start with story number 1, Gen Z's influence. Is this generation of teens and 20-somethings really different than when we were all that age? I argue that the answer is yes. They are the first generation to grow up fully online and to graduate from school in a pandemic, learning online in isolation from their peers. And it turns out when Gen Zers take a remote job, they mostly feel lonely. And when they take any job, they wonder why we have to work so many hours for such low pay, which is starting to influence some of the recent union activity and the greater push for a 4-day work week and more flexibility in hours. All good things. Also good, their desire for a dumb phone, like the one recently created by musician Kendrick Lamar, that only has the capability to handle phone calls, texts, an alarm, a calculator, music, and directions. Maybe we should all be reverting to that. And concerning, the US birth rate is at its lowest level in history, likely due to fewer marriages, more higher education goals, and challenges with affording a home. An increase in the U.S. infant mortality rate for the first time in 2 decades is clearly another concern. What does all this mean for small business owners? Pay attention to what's different and how Gen Z employees, freelancers, collaborators, anyone you work with, how they approach the world. And maybe it will help your business be more future-focused. All right, moving on to story number 2, China's economy. It's not so good. Foreign firms are pulling their earnings from Chinese investments out of the country rather than reinvesting. And the government is trying to lure young people to rural areas in China since the unemployment rate in their cities is so high. But the rural areas are nearly deserted, so many people have moved to the cities. The government is still creating jobs for these Gen Zers, including selling grapes via live streaming and teaching residents how to read expiration dates on food labels. And you thought you hated your first job at a school. Not surprisingly, this is leading to a major influx of Chinese migration to the US. What is surprising is their path through the southern border with Mexico. Do you do business with China? Consider the impact of these changes on the future of your business, or perhaps the value of bringing on Chinese labor in the US if you have jobs that sound better than teaching people about expiration dates. And with that, let's move on to story number 3, ethics and big tech. A mismatch? Lots of news packed into this topic in the newsletter, but here are the highlights. It sounds like Amazon put together policies and code that penalized sellers, and then they intentionally destroyed the internal messages about that to thwart the FTC's investigation. Instagram has a serious issue with teens receiving unwanted sexual advances, and they haven't done much about it. Microsoft decided to drop human editors and let AI curate their MSN news site, but the AI has been publishing false and bizarre stories and creating less than ideal headlines, like the one about a 42-year-old former NBA player who died unexpectedly. Headline, Brandon Hunter useless at 42. Wow. More in the newsletter on AI, copyright law, Scarlett Johansson, and Elon Musk's new AI tool named Grok, stealing from the Hitchhiker's Guide, that has a rebellious streak, as if that is a good thing in an AI chatbot. So when do you think the government should intervene? What constitutes a monopoly? When is something unethical, and when should it be illegal? Do we let big tech play like this because we hope to follow in their footsteps? I'm curious what your thoughts are. All right, and moving on to story number 4, women in the workforce, the continuing saga. First, the good news. A record number of top MBA programs have at least 50% female enrollment this year, although across all programs, the number is closer to 40%. In other good news, SBA loans to women-owned businesses are up to 20% of all the loans. That may not seem like much of a milestone, but only 35 years ago, a female business owner had to have a male relative co-sign just to get a loan. In less good news, it turns out that women are more likely than men to ask for more compensation, but they still earn less, and they're experiencing burnout at higher rates than men. But it makes financial sense, if not just common sense, to treat women fairly, as recent data shows that companies with gender parity among top jobs outperform their peers with less gender equity, based on average annual return on assets. So it's just good financial business decision to hire and pay women what they're worth, or at least as much as you pay your male employees. And finally, on to our final story, story number 5, where to live. Do you ever think about some amazingly beautiful spot that you'd like to retire to someday? Maybe a nice home on the water with a view of the beach, or maybe Buffalo, New York? Those beaches are slowly shrinking, according to a recent article, so don't invest too much money on land that's going to disappear. Instead, consider one of the best American cities to ride out the coming dystopia. That's the word of the article, not mine this time. Considerations include avoiding the doom loop of big cities, high temperatures, flooding, fires, hurricanes, and the high cost of living, among others. So what are the top locations? All around the Great Lakes here in the beautiful Midwest, including Buffalo, Cincinnati, Detroit, Duluth in Minnesota, Grand Rapids in Michigan. I have been making these arguments for years about the coasts disappearing and the North becoming the ideal climate, so I guess I really am a futurist. And finally, one bonus story. If you have followed my news for any length of time, you'll perhaps remember there was a long stretch of time where SBF, the man, and FTX, his company, were in the news regularly in a continuing saga about cryptocurrency, arrogant bros, and fraud. The whole saga is now coming to an end with SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, convicted of multiple fraud and conspiracy charges related to him stealing and using billions of dollars from its own customers. It took the jury less than 5 hours to deliberate and deliver that verdict. End of saga. All right, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Another friendly reminder, my paid newsletter offers more details on each of these topics than there is room for in this video, so reach out if you'd like to see a free copy to help you decide if you want to subscribe. And thanks for joining me this week for 5 for the Future.